the European Union, whoever is the decision makers in the European Union, to think of Israel as, because they have been influenced by these endless wars, endless conflicts in the Middle East directly, and how they can do in order to convince the United States that this policy is not working. Right now, we have many problems in Europe, and
Well, yeah, sorry.
but the
Yes, no,
question, the main question is, what leverage the European Union has to put any sort of pressure on Israel or on the United States?
the short answer is none. The short answer is none. By the way, as we discuss both the question of Ukraine, by the way, and the Palestine, we see that each time everybody turns to the US. Um, uh, Even if the US seems in both situations to be rather powerless, but I mean, it has some influence, but not an influence that may help to solve the problem in a satisfactory way for both actors on both conflict. In any case, when we address the question of Palestine, and that's not new, by the way, that's not just since the 7th of October, but Europe has never been a real actor in that. You had, at some point, you had some individual countries, especially France, um, that, especially, let's say, 30 years ago, something like that, France still had some kind of leverage and could have an influence, probably not just over Israel, but also over the Arabic states, because it had good relations on both sides. But today, France diplomacy is inexistent, is inexperienced, and has demonstrated its inability to solve issue. And that's very true for the European diplomacy. European diplomacy is inexistent in the Ukrainian conflict, with the exception of providing weapons and putting more gasoline on the fire. For that, the diplomacy is very good. And remember that they just nominated Mrs. Kaya Kallas at the head of the European diplomacy, and Kaya Kallas is from Estonia, a strong anti-Russian, and Baltic states have very little experience of the Middle East, if none, and no interest for the Middle East, absolutely zero interest. So how can we expect from the European Union, which was already quite weak under Josep Borrell, who used to be the head of the European Union foreign policy or external service? Um, so Josep Borrell was very poor, had a very poor results in this conflict. So how can we expect Kaya Kallas to do better? I think it's hopeless. The European Union is certainly not considered as a serious interlocutor by neither of the parties, neither from Iran and from Arab countries, neither from Israel. So forget about European Union. And in addition to that, we can see in European Union some kind of suicidal type of behavior. Just note that very recently, that's a German word, sorry, Signora Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, decided to resume diplomatic relationships with Syria, with the idea that in order to prevent or to limit the extension of immigration, it would be probably more interesting to have good relation with Syria. And some other countries of Europe were favorable to this idea And some countries have even signed a letter to the European Commission in order to promote the idea of resuming diplomatic relations with Syria and opening a Syrian embassy in the European Union. But it's very interesting to see that from the European Union itself, you had a very strong negative reaction to that, even though the purpose of resuming diplomatic relations, as I said, had for purpose as a purpose to reduce illegal immigration, which is obviously a problem that we have seen in particular in Sweden and right now in the UK, by the way, to see that all this immigration that, because remember that the bulk of this immigration that came just after 2015, after the US and the British, the French, and the Belgian decided to fight more aggressively the Islamic State in Iraq, not in Syria, but in Iraq, and that had as a consequence that a lot of those extreme Islamist fighters who were, I mean, they were not really fighting for something. They were fighting the regime of Bashar al-Assad, but I'm not sure they were very convinced about the necessity of this fight. As a result, as soon as they had the opportunity to leave Syria and to get the status of refugee in Europe, they did so. As a result, the refugees that Europe got just after 2015, in fact, were mostly Islamists in reality. And for that reason, by the way, as they came in Syria, and not if you looked at the profile of those who came to Europe during those years, 2016, 2015, 16, 17, they were all young males that, in fact, tried to escape the U.S. and French bombing in Iraq and partially in Syria, because even though the Western armies didn't fight the Islamic State in Syria as such, I mean, they never fought against the Islamic State when the Islamic State was confronting Syrian army. They fought against the Islamic State when the Islamic State was confronting the Kurds. And in fact, the Western Air Force and armies and special force and all that acted in support of the Kurds, and therefore used to fight very selectively the Islamic State in the Kurds area, but not in the western part of Syria. As a result, a lot of young Syrians, or let's say Sunni, who wanted to avoid those bombing, they came to Europe. So Europe didn't receive a very strong elite. There were people who were ready to fight and all that, and as they didn't get what they ex- hoped to get in the West, well, they started to make some disorder. That's very true in Sweden. And Sweden has a very strong problem with immigration, because the type of immigration Sweden accepted was the worst type of immigration. I mean, that was the worst choice that they could have, but they did that on their own. Their intelligence service is notably weak in terms of analysis, and that's exactly the result for Sweden. So, and in UK, the history is not very different. Is a little bit. It's probably traced back longer in time. So it's something that traced back to the Iraqi war in 2003 and so on. So, but it's a similar situation. Those people who came to Europe were not the best educated people, the best people, and so on and so forth. And as a result, they uh, they are keen to create a trouble, and if they were, and the policies of the European countries were such that they never tried or they never managed to integrate those people. As a result, European Union could have an interest in having good relationship with Bashar al-Assad in order to prevent this flow of immigration coming from Syria, and to facilitate the return of these refugees to Syria. But even that, the European Commission is not willing to do so. So we have a very strange relationship, strange reaction in Europe, and I'm not sure that the Europeans have understood exactly what is going on, and they haven't really understood what is at stake, both in the Middle East and even in their own countries, by the way. So. Um, at the end of the day, we it's a little bit desperate, but because today, as we see today, the European Union is putting some pressure on Mrs. Meloni and other countries who are like-minded in order to ease relationship with Syria. So we are definitely not. From If we look at the European foreign policy, we are definitely not in a situation where the Europeans are willing to ease the situation. In my view, they are more pouring more gasoline on the fire, and they are more creating more problems for the future. But again, it's very hard to understand the rationale which is behind those strange decisions, and the lack of understanding what is at stake in the mid and long term, because that's the problem.